Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
Evan's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of Karen's house, clutching the surveyor's report like a shield. The familiar sight of her immaculate lawn, trimmed with military precision, did nothing to calm his nerves. He took a deep breath, hoping that confronting her face-to-face would end this madness. He would lay the facts out for her, and maybe, just maybe, she'd see reason. But as soon as Karen appeared on the front porch, his hopes were dashed. She wore that same smug expression, the one that made him feel like he was beneath her, like she held all the power. "What's this?" Karen asked, her voice dripping with feigned sweetness. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe as though she were granting him a favor by listening. "I've got the property survey," Evan said, holding it up. "The fence is on my land. It's not just a mistake, it's an encroachment." His voice was steady, but the frustration clawed at him, threatening to break free. Karen's lips twitched upward, and for a split second, Evan saw something flicker. Behind her eyes, something that resembled amusement. "Oh, is that so? You really think that's going to change anything?" Her dismissive tone stung more than he expected. "I'm just asking for you to move the fence," Evan said, his grip tightening on the paper. "You've been on my property for years. This isn't a small mistake, Karen. It's not just some HOA regulation, it's my land. I'm not going to let this slide." Karen's gaze flickered over the surveyor's report, then back to him. She stepped off the porch, striding toward him with an air of superiority. "You really think I'm going to be bullied by some report? From a surveyor?" she sneered. "You can't just waltz in here and tell me what to do. You're no different from the other petty complaints I've had to deal with in this neighborhood." Evan's jaw clenched. "This isn't a petty complaint. You're taking something that doesn't belong to you. It's time for you to make it right." Karen's eyes narrowed, and Evan could feel the shift in the air, the subtle tension that preceded her every attack. "You think the HOA is going to back you on this? You really think they care about some misplaced fence?" She laughed, the sound sharp and cutting. "I've got connections. The HOA won't do anything. They'll listen to me, as always." Evan felt the blood drain from his face. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about everything. Karen had manipulated the HOA for years, bending the rules to her will, making sure no one dared challenge her. He'd seen her do it before, silencing complaints, turning neighbors against each other with a smile and a well-placed word. And now it was his turn to be her target. "This isn't just about the fence," he said, trying to steady his breath. "This is about you thinking you can do whatever you want, regardless of who it hurts. I'm not going to let you get away with it anymore." Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a mockingly soothing tone. "Evan, you really should know your place. You're just one person in a sea of complaints. If I wanted, I could make your life miserable. And believe me, I will. This is my neighborhood, and I don't take kindly to people who think they can step all over me." The threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. For a moment, Evan hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. Karen had power, real power, and he was just one person. What could he possibly do to stand up to someone who had already built an empire? On manipulating the HOA? But then something shifted in him, a flicker of resolve. "Is that how you want to play it?" Evan asked, his voice low and steady. "Because you can't intimidate me anymore. You've pushed people around for too long, and I'm done letting you get away with it." Karen's smirk faltered for just a second, and it was enough to make Evan feel a surge of satisfaction. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to anyone standing up to her. She recovered quickly, though, and before Evan could react, she flipped her hair back, her voice dripping with disdain. "You think you can take me on? You think anyone in this neighborhood will care about your little survey? You're nothing, Evan. You're a nobody." The words stung, but they only fueled his determination. He'd come this far. He wasn't going to back down now. "I don't need anyone's help to get what I deserve," Evan said. You can't keep using your connections to avoid the consequences of your actions. You're going to fix this. I'm going to make sure of it. Karen's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly masked it behind a thin veil of amusement. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice almost sweet in its venom. "But if you want to make a fuss, go ahead. I'm looking forward to watching you fail." Evan turned on his heel, the weight of the encounter sinking in. Karen's words echoed in his mind, but he refused to let them control him. He wasn't going to let her intimidate him anymore. He had the proof now. And he knew how to fight back. As he walked back toward his house, the wheels in his mind began to turn. Karen had made one fatal mistake. She had underestimated him. She thought she could control the narrative, twist the rules in her favor, but Evan wasn't going to let her get away with it. He would find a way to expose her, to show the neighborhood what kind of person she really was. But as the weight of the situation settled on his shoulders, Evan realized one thing. He couldn't just take Karen down with facts alone. She was too entrenched in her power. No, if he wanted to win, he needed to outsmart her. He needed to play the game on his terms, and he was just getting started. The morning sun sliced through the trees, casting long shadows across the neighborhood. Evan stood at the edge of his driveway, staring down the line that divided his property from his neighbor's. The faint scent of freshly cut grass mingled with the cool, crisp air of early spring. But something felt wrong. He shifted his gaze toward the faded red fence that ran along the property line, eyes narrowing as if he could will the truth to reveal itself. He'd noticed the change a few days ago, the way the fence seemed to have crept a few inches onto his side of the yard, as if the earth itself had shifted under the pressure of years of passive neglect. But today, it felt more than just a small encroachment. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. The number flashing on the screen was all too familiar. Karen, the HOA president. A surge of irritation bubbled up in his chest as he answered. "Evan," her voice was sharp, almost gleeful. "You're trespassing on my property." He blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "What?" "Karen, I'm standing on my own land. I don't want to hear your excuses." She cut him off, her tone dripping with authority. "You've been walking around my yard, messing with my property, and I won't stand for it. If I see you there again, I'm reporting you to the HOA and the police." Evan's hand tightened around his phone. He could almost hear her sneer through the receiver, the quiet smugness of someone accustomed to getting their way. "I haven't stepped onto your property," he said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "You're mistaken. I'm on my own land. You know this. I've been here for years." "Oh, I'm sure you'll find some excuse." Karen's voice dripped with condescension. "But the boundaries are clear, and I'm tired of you acting like you own everything. You've been warned. Stay off my land or else." The line went dead. Evan stood there for a moment, staring at the phone in his hand, his breath quickening, with a mix of disbelief and frustration. This wasn't the first time Karen had been overbearing. He was used to her petty complaints about the neighborhood, her obsession with rules and regulations that were bent only in her favor. But this felt personal. He marched inside and grabbed the property survey he'd received when he bought the house. A careful look through the paperwork confirmed what he suspected. The boundaries were clearly marked. His lot extended. Past the fence just a few feet, but enough to matter. The red fence, the one Karen had put up years ago, was almost entirely on his side. The nerve. Evan couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was trying to push him around once again. She had a habit of asserting control over the neighborhood with a practiced air of entitlement. The woman was always stirring up trouble, making everyone follow her every demand as though she were the law herself. And for some inexplicable reason, she had always singled him out. He couldn't let this go. Without wasting another moment, Evan grabbed his keys and headed out the door. The surveyor he'd used when buying the house was a reputable guy, someone who wouldn't hesitate to come out for a second opinion. It was a small step, but it would give him the clarity and the evidence, he needed to face Karen with something tangible. Maybe, just maybe, this time she wouldn't be able to twist the facts in her favor. He arrived at the surveyor's office, a nondescript building tucked between two larger businesses. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and stale paperwork. The man behind the counter looked up when Evan entered. "Mr. Carter, right?" The surveyor, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and glasses that perched at the tip of his nose, greeted him. "How can I help you?" "I need a new survey. I've got an issue with my neighbor's property line, and I think her fence is on my side," Evan said, pushing the door open behind him to reveal the small stack of paperwork. "I want to make sure everything's still correct." The surveyor nodded, motioning for Evan to sit. "We'll get that checked out for you. Shouldn't take long. I'll send someone out to mark the property lines again. We'll get you a new report within a few days." Evan nodded, feeling a small measure of relief. But as he walked out the door, the knot in his stomach didn't loosen. Karen wasn't going to be easy to deal with. She never was. The next few days passed in a blur. Evan tried to put it out of his mind, focusing on the mundane aspects of life, work, the never-ending string of household chores. But Karen's call loomed in the background, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Every time he walked out his front door, he couldn't shake the feeling that her eyes were on him, waiting for him to step out of line. Then, on the fourth day, the surveyor called. "Mr. Carter, I've got the results," he said over the phone. "It's as you suspected. The fence is definitely on your property." Evan felt a surge of triumph mixed with disbelief. He had been right. Karen had been encroaching on his land for years. She had no right to accuse him of trespassing. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady. "I'll be in touch." He hung up the phone, his mind already racing. He knew what he had to do now. Armed with the survey report, he would march over to Karen's house and confront her. No more excuses, no more threats. She would understand that he wasn't going to back down. But as Evan stood at the edge of his driveway once again, staring at the red fence in the distance, a thought crept into his mind. What if this is just the beginning? The HOA Karen was never satisfied with a single victory. She'd made it clear that she always had more tricks up her sleeve. Evan wasn't sure what was coming next, but he knew this much. His fight with Karen was far from over, and for the first time, he was ready to make sure it would be the last. Evan's resolve hardened as he sat down at his kitchen table that night, the surveyor's report spread out in front of him. The moonlight filtered in through the window, casting a pale glow over the pages as his mind raced. He could already hear Karen's mocking voice echoing in his head, telling him he was nothing, that no one would ever back him up. The anger bubbled beneath the surface, but Evan knew he couldn't afford to let his emotions rule him, not this time. If he was going to beat Karen at her own game, he needed to be smart, to outplay her at every turn. She thrived on control, on manipulating others to do her bidding, but Evan wasn't like the others. He wasn't just going to stand by and let her have her way. The answer came to him suddenly, a flash of insight that felt almost too obvious. He could expose Karen for what she truly was. The HOA wasn't a tight-knit, all-powerful organization. It was a community, full of neighbors who were tired of her reign. If he could get the right people on his side, neighbors who had been too afraid to speak out, he could create a storm that Karen wouldn't be able to weather. He reached for his phone, his fingers flying over the screen as he typed out a message to a few people in the neighborhood. He wasn't going to start by making demands or issuing threats. No, he was going to plant the seeds of doubt, just like Karen had done to so many others. He wasn't asking for a confrontation. He was asking for a chance to show them the truth. Within hours, the responses came flooding in. A few were cautious, uncertain whether they should get involved. But others, long silent neighbors who had watched Karen wield her power like a weapon, were eager to take action. They had all seen the small injustices, the petty rules she bent to suit her needs, but they had been too afraid to speak out, too conditioned to believe that challenging her would only make their lives harder. Evan wasn't asking them to make a scene, not yet, but he knew that if he could get enough of them to come forward, if he could gather evidence of her manipulations, he could expose her to the rest of the neighborhood. And that, he realized, would be her undoing. The next day, Evan gathered a small group at the local coffee shop, a neutral location where he could avoid raising suspicion. As he walked in, he saw them gathered at the back table, a mix of wary faces and quiet voices. Karen had already made her mark on them, and it was clear they all carried the weight of fear. But Evan saw something else, too. Hope. For the first time in years, they were willing to talk. He sat down, offering a friendly smile, though his mind was focused on the task ahead. "Thanks for meeting with me," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I know this isn't easy, but we all know what Karen's been doing around here. I'm not asking you to risk your homes or your peace of mind. But if we want to take her down, we have to work together." One of the men, a middle-aged homeowner named Jeff, leaned forward. "We've been hearing whispers about this for a while, but no one's had the guts to challenge her directly." He looked around the table as if expecting one of the others to back out. "I've had enough. She pushed me to put up that fence in my backyard, even though it was on my neighbor's land. She told me I had no choice." Evan nodded, understanding. All too well. Karen had done that to more than one person in the neighborhood. She'd used the HOA as a weapon, forcing compliance through fear and manipulation. "That's the kind of thing we need to expose," Evan said. "If we can get enough evidence, get the stories from people like Jeff here, we can make her look like the fraud she is. We just need to stay quiet and gather it all." A woman sitting across from him, Sarah, spoke up next. "I've had my issues with Karen, too. She sent me a fine for something ridiculous. Said I was parking in my own driveway too often. I told her it was none of her business and she threatened to go to the board. I couldn't afford to fight it, so I just paid up." Evan's eyes narrowed with determination. This was exactly what he needed. Testimonies from people who had suffered in silence, afraid of the consequences of speaking out. He was starting to see the pieces fall into place. "I know it's been hard, but it's time to stop letting her get away with it. We don't need to get aggressive. We just need to build a case. Every story matters. Every piece of evidence we can collect will show that Karen isn't just a petty neighbor. She's abusing her power." As he spoke, Evan could see the shift in the room. The tension that had filled the air seemed to loosen just a little, replaced by the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. "I'm in," Sarah said, her voice more confident now. "I've seen her do it to others too. She took advantage of me because I didn't know my rights." The others nodded in agreement, their wariness slowly turning into resolve. They were no longer just victims of Karen's manipulation. They were willing to fight back. Evan stood, a sense of purpose rising within him. "We'll take this slow. Keep things discreet. We'll gather evidence, talk to more people, and then, when we're ready, we'll go to the HOA. If we all present the truth, they won't be able to ignore it. Karen's time in control is over." As the group dispersed, Evan felt the weight of his plan settle onto his shoulders. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Karen was ruthless, and she wouldn't give up her power without a fight. But for the first time in a long while, Evan felt like he had the upper hand. With every neighbor he spoke to, every new piece of evidence they gathered, he was one step closer to taking Karen down. It was time to turn the tables, and this time, it wouldn't be Karen who called the shots. The night of the HOA meeting arrived, and Evan felt the weight of every hour of preparation pressing down on him. He had spent weeks gathering evidence, meeting with neighbors, building a case that would show Karen for what she truly was. Someone who manipulated the system, who used fear and favoritism to stay in control. The quiet resolve he'd felt in the early stages of his plan had hardened into something more potent, a steely determination to not only take her down but to expose the hypocrisy of the HOA and its blind obedience to her. He stood outside the community center. The faint hum of voices spilling through the door, the smell of stale coffee and printer ink in the air. Inside, Karen would be working her charm, turning the board in her favor, swaying anyone who might still question her. But not tonight. Tonight, everything would change. Evan took a deep breath and walked in, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the tension building in the pit of his stomach. The familiar faces of the HOA members looked up as he entered, their expressions polite but cold. Karen was seated near the front, her posture perfect, her smile as polished as ever, like a predator who had found her prey. He walked to the back, where the small group of neighbors he had rallied were already seated. They gave him encouraging nods, and for the first time, Evan allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. This was it. This was the moment. The meeting began with the usual pleasantries, the mundane issues of the neighborhood discussed in dry, formal tones. Evan's eyes kept flickering to Karen, watching her as she glanced at the board members, engaging in whispered conversations, her eyes flickering toward him every so often, as though sensing the storm he was about to unleash. But she had no idea what was coming. Then it was his turn. Evan stood, his palms sweating as he stepped forward. The room fell into a tense silence, every eye on him. He cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. His voice came out steady, though his heart beat wildly in his chest. "Good evening, everyone," he began, glancing around at the faces of his neighbors. "I'm here tonight because I believe we all deserve a fair and just neighborhood. For too long, some of us have been manipulated, pressured, and even threatened by those in positions of power, particularly Karen." A murmur rippled through the room, but Evan pressed on, determined to finish what he started. "I've gathered evidence, testimonies from neighbors who've experienced this firsthand, and tonight, I want to present that to all of you. We are not a group of disgruntled residents. These are the stories of people who have been pushed to the edge." He motioned to the first piece of evidence, a folder filled with emails, photos, and recordings that he had painstakingly compiled. "This is the proof that Karen has used the HOA's influence to manipulate situations, fine residents for petty things, and take land that doesn't belong to her. You all know the rules of this neighborhood. The fence she erected on my property is only the beginning." A few heads turned toward Karen, but she remained composed, her smile never wavering. Evan could almost see her mind working, calculating her next move, trying to regain control. But the crowd was already uneasy, their suspicions beginning to form into something more concrete. He continued, presenting each piece of evidence methodically, watching as the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's perfect. Facade was cracking, just slightly, but enough for Evan to see it. Her eyes darted around the room, no longer with confidence, but with an edge of panic. "And it's not just me," Evan said, turning to the group of neighbors he had gathered. "I have people here who will testify to their experiences. People who have been threatened, who have been pushed to accept things that were unfair, all because Karen knew how to use her influence to make it happen." He looked at the first neighbor, Jeff, who stood up to speak. His voice was steady, though his hands trembled slightly as he began recounting the story of how Karen had forced him to build a fence on land that wasn't his. "I didn't know what to do," Jeff said. "She had the HOA behind her, and I couldn't risk losing my home over a stupid boundary dispute." Next, Sarah took the floor, recounting how Karen had fined her for an infraction so small it was laughable. "I just wanted to park in my driveway," she said, shaking her head. "But Karen said it was a violation. And when I questioned it, she threatened to take me to the board. I didn't have the money to fight her." The room was silent, every word landing like a weight. One by one, the neighbors spoke out, each testimony adding weight to the mountain of evidence Evan had built. Karen's smile faded entirely now. She stood up abruptly, her voice sharp, like a crack of lightning in the room. "This is absurd!" she spat. "You're all just jealous, angry people trying to ruin my good name. These accusations are nothing but lies." Evan remained calm, his gaze unwavering as he stepped forward. "Karen, we're not here to ruin your name. We're here to stop you from ruining ours. You've used your position to control us, to make us fear speaking out. But no more." Her face twisted with rage, her eyes wild as she tried to regain control, but the room had already turned. The board members, once her allies, now looked uncertain, their eyes flicking between the evidence and her frantic demeanor. "Is this really the kind of leadership we want in our neighborhood?" Evan asked, his voice rising, filling the room with quiet authority. "Is this the example we want to set for the next generation? A leader who uses fear and manipulation to get what she wants?" Karen's breathing quickened, and for the first time, the cracks in her perfect exterior were undeniable. She had underestimated him, underestimated the people she had tormented for so long. One of the board members, a woman Evan had never seen speak before, stood up. "I think it's time we reevaluate Karen's role in this community," she said, her voice firm. "We can't ignore the evidence any longer." Karen's face paled and she took a step back, as though the room was closing in on her. The once untouchable queen of the neighborhood was unraveling before their eyes, her power slipping through her fingers. The climax had arrived, and Evan stood at the center of it, not as the victim, but as the victor. The storm had broken, and there was no going back. As the board members began to murmur amongst themselves, Evan caught Karen's eye one last time. Her gaze was filled with fury, but it was no longer the smug arrogance he had once feared. It was the look of a defeated woman, standing on the precipice of everything she had built, watching it crumble to dust. The neighborhood had spoken, and for the first time, Karen had no more tricks up her sleeve.